An Airbus A340 is rolling on the runway in Australia with full capacity. It's almost the end of the runway and it's unable to take off. It could have been a fatal disaster, but a last-moment decision changed it all. This is the story of Emirates Flight 407 and we'll find out how it happened. Late evening on the 20th of March 2009, an Emirates Airbus A340 was operating flight EK407 from Auckland to Dubai with a stop in Melbourne. What started as a routine flight turned into a nightmare when the aircraft sustained multiple tail strikes and damage resulting from small error from the pilots. EK407 had 4 pilots. Because of the long flight, 2 of them operate the flight for the prescribed time while the other 2 are on rest. The time and experience of the cockpit crew are the following. As the pilots were preparing for departure, the first officer mistakenly entered the incorrect takeoff weight into the EFB, the electronic flight bag. The EFB is a device given to the crew to calculate the performance parameters like the takeoff reference speeds, the flap, the engine settings, etc. As technology has advanced, everything has become very compact, whereas before it was all done on paper. It gives them all the speeds and settings automatically required, which are then manually entered into the FMCG. As the takeoff parameters calculation relies on the manual entry into the EFB, including the aircraft takeoff weight, incorrect parameters were the outcome. A base takeoff weight of 361.9 tons was available for the flight. The crew's intention was to add an additional ton to the figure to allow for any last-minute weight changes and enter the takeoff weight of 362.9 into the EFB. However, while entering the final takeoff weight into the EFB, the first officer entered 262.9 tons instead of the intended 362.9 tons and did not notice that error. Shortly after entering the wrong takeoff weight, the first officer handed the EFB to the captain to check the associated performance figures before entering the calculated performance parameters into the aircraft systems. Unfortunately, the captain was distracted due to the other activities in the cockpit, which resulted in him not detecting the incorrect takeoff weight and associated parameters. Usually, the captain's check is required to include a verbal check between the 2 pilots. However, the verbal check was omitted, probably due to the various distractions, and the first officer was busy with the ATC to get their departure clearance. Then the captain entered the wrong EFB parameters into the FMGS and cross-checked with the first officer against the values on the flight plan, and as a result, the weight error remained undetected. Flight 407 was 7 minutes ahead of the schedule, and at time 22:30, the ATC cleared flight EK407 to line up and cleared the aircraft for takeoff from runway 16. Flight 407 was on the runway and the captain advanced the throttles. When the aircraft reached the calculated rotation speed of 145, the captain called for the first officer to rotate the aircraft, after which the first officer applied a back pressure on the stick. However, the aircraft did not respond as expected and the nose did not rise. The captain called again, "Rotate," and the first officer pulled back further. Even though the nose began to rise, the aircraft failed to lift off the runway as it was traveling too slowly to lift off. Sensing that something was wrong, the aircraft was not up to the speed required because of the wrong takeoff weight, the captain immediately selected TOGA, which is takeoff go round. The tail of the aircraft was in contact with the runway, causing huge damage to the tail section of the aircraft. As soon as the pilot selected TOGA on the thrust levers, the engines responded immediately and the aircraft started to accelerate as it passed off the end of the runway along with the stopway and across the grassed clearway. At about the same time, the aircraft sustained multiple tail strikes and became airborne after 3 seconds after selection of TOGA, about 148 meters beyond the end of the runway. It was a close call for Flight 407, but because it had passed the clearway, it hit the ILS antenna and the strobe lights for runway 34, which damaged and disabled the ILS for runway 16. Shortly after, the crew members were alerted to a tail strike by an automated message in the cockpit, as we can see here, and a radio call from the air traffic control. As a result, the crew decided to return back to Melbourne to assess the damage. The aircraft was in the air, but coming back to land was a problem again because they were above the maximum landing weight. So they climbed to 7,000 feet and they had to follow a procedure called fuel jettison. They had to reduce the weight of the aircraft to 280 tons so that they can land safely without damaging the components of the aircraft. But another problem was that the passengers and crew had reported smoke in the cabin, which could mean a fire. And because of that, the first officer briefed the crew on a possibility of an evacuation after landing. As reported by the ATSB, the flight crew made 3 independent calculations of the landing performance. They did so to ensure that there were no further performance calculation errors. Flight 407 returned to Melbourne safely and landed on runway 34 after 1 hour and 4 minutes after departure. After the landing, the captain advised the cabin crew members to revert to normal operation, and the aircraft taxied back to the terminal where the passengers were disembarked. None of the passengers and crew members were injured. After a thorough inspection of the aircraft, it was revealed that serious damage was done to the underside of the rear fuselage, where the lower skin panels completely stripped off its external sheet by contact with the runway surface, as the heavy aircraft traveling at speeds of more than 300 km per hour struck the runway. Furthermore, a service panel was dislodged and found beyond the end of the runway 16, along with numerous pieces of metal stripped from the lower skin panels. The rear fuselage section was severely damaged. This clearly shows that one error from the pilots could have costed the life of 260 people. After the investigation of Flight 407, the ATSB concluded the Airbus A340 involved in the incident was repaired and returned to service several months later. On the 1st of December 2009, the aircraft made its first revenue flight after repairs and remained in service with the Dubai-based carrier until 2014.